This is Permaculture Perspectives. I'm here with Erik Schellenberg and really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. And we'll be looking at Erik's background in syntropic methods as well as permaculture work. And Erik and I have been really working in the same field and colleagues and collaborators sort of running parallel for a lot of years in the permaculture community. And we've worked up in Vermont on projects that are shared colleagues with Mark Krawczyk, who's a good friend. And we've also collaborated a good bit, again, running parallel with permaculture design certification programs. So I'm really honored to have Erik here taking the time to share this depth of professional experience in the field that this podcast really is about, introducing people to really what we would call cutting edge thinkers, people who are really informing others about what these methods look like. There's so much that I could share here at the beginning, but I'll let Erik get into some of this. But in particular, I want to, before we start to talk about your journey to permaculture and what brought you to what we call the P word, right? Black Creek Nursery and your work with tree crops and your work with agroforestry is near and dear to the work we're doing with Permaculture Land Trust. And so this is a overdue podcast interview with Erik Schellenberg, and we are going to dive into a lot of things related to permaculture, but also looking specifically at syntropic methodology and Erik's background and experience and travels to Brazil to study with Ernst Gertsch and hear some of what he brought back with him then, and also just offered a program in at Black Creek Nursery. So Erik, thanks again for talking with us this evening.
Thank you for having me. This is wonderful, and I appreciate all the work you've done over the years and how much you bring this this whole constellation of knowledge and ways of thinking to the public. It's a real very important thing that needs to be done more.
Yeah. I think having ways for people to engage with this way of doing things, this way of understanding, and really so much what I admire about your work is the practical application, the as we call it, boots on the ground experience that you have. So often we'll find that people in permaculture are a little bit disparaged by the general, say, farming community for not being real farmers, that were sort of armchair gentleman farmers, which I don't know that there's necessarily a problem with that, but many people in the agricultural community hang their hats on whether you're really doing physical work, and you absolutely are that exemplar to me of people who have praxis and theory. And that's such an important part of what to me again is sort of a classic unstated permaculture ideal. Is like, if we're gonna teach this stuff, we need to really have actual life experience, at least to some depth of degree, to be able to offer some insights about really what does it look like to practice these methods in a real world, not simply theoretical sense. So really appreciate that so much about your journey in this field and what I've observed about your work. Yeah. So tell us a little about what brought you to permaculture, if you wouldn't mind indulging us in a little storytelling about your background.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would say that the journey towards really thinking more about how we can live, so many words, how we can live sustainably on this planet. I'll just use a classic word, sustainably or regeneratively. How we could be a functional part of life in the biosphere, rather than everything we do seeming to destroy and detract from the process of life. How can we live that way? I've been thinking about that for a long time, and my first approach was in biology, and I went to school for biology, and I was fascinated to learn more about how living systems work. And I did a lot of looking at very small parts. So I did molecular genetics and neuro. I worked in a neuroscience lab, and I was ready to do that with my life. And then I backed out because there was too much laboratory time and too much uh,
Mhm.
it just the day to day was terrible. And um, as intellectually stimulating as it was, I didn't feel like there was a future where there was an option for me to really change anything about our condition, how we were living, humans. And so I got a really lucky situation at that time, and I went down to um, just word of mouth, not through any kind of program. I just got to stay with an indigenous family in southern Mexico and just live with them for no real purpose. You know, I was introduced to them at a farmer's market, and that's where they had a little cooperative, and they sold coffee. And so I spent a long time down there, the whole summer down there, just learning how to um, slash up sticks with a machete and plant corn by hand and carry wet donkey manure on your back through the rain, you know, just stuff that I had never done anything like that. You know, I grew up with gardens, but it was not like that. And so that experience really was formative for me because I saw a different culture behaving in a way that felt truly embodied in the landscape, and their culture was part of the landscape. And you know, I got to go back and visit again later on, and I plan on taking my family and my children down there because they left such an indelible mark on my journey. And so that
What part
changed.
of Mexico is that?
That was in the Sierra Norte of Oaxaca. So the mountains to the north of the city of Oaxaca, 5 hours north, where they grow the Café de Altura, which is like the really high quality coffee that takes a long time to mature because of the low temperatures. So it's really excellent.
Mm.
And they practice pretty much traditional milpa agriculture without even the burning. So it was a really, you know, by today's standards of regenerative agriculture, it
Yeah.
would be so forward thinking, it wouldn't even be allowed in the universities. You know, and of course, it's 10,000 years old. So it's just that these beautiful old systems that have so much knowledge behind them and so much care for the land. Um, you know, every bean of coffee was cared for multiple times, put
Mhm.
out to dry, taken back if it was going to rain. No bean was left behind, and all the animals and plants were respected in the ecosystem, and it was a sight to behold, and something beautiful to be part of. And so after that, um, I decided to go to graduate school for something that I felt would be similar to that. I wanted to see if I could go to grad school for something similar. And so I got into a program about traditional ecological knowledge, and that took me to live with the Inuvialuit, another indigenous group in the Western Arctic, and totally different climate and different everything, but similar experience again with totally different people um, living in a totally different way that really was part of the ecological rhythm of the land. That was their culture was a part of that, and
Wow, that's
it's something
fascinating.
that many of us know and feel that our industrial culture is anything but part of the rhythm of life. It's just something totally different, and it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel good. And so when you are in a culture that still acts that way, you immediately you can feel that, you can detect that.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so still up until this point in my life, I had never heard of permaculture, and then I tell this story. It's not a joke. It's not an embellishment. It's the absolute fact of what happened. I have finished my my thesis. I handed in 120 pages, edited 1,000 times, and I was in the library, and I was done. I was just looking around the library, and this light comes through a window and it illuminates this book, and I walk over and the book has a really cool picture on it, and it was the Permaculture Designer's Manual. And so I took the book out and I read the whole thing, and even after all this cool stuff that I learned in grad school, I was still shocked upon reading this book. You know, it was truly, it took, you know, we had been using these words like holistic and resilient and you know, all the buzzwords, and learning about the origin of the buzzwords, but still somehow this holistic way of looking at things, this inter looking at the relationships, the interrelationships, it still was amazing to me how forward thinking it seemed and was.
Hmm.
And yeah, so that's that's my story of how I came across permaculture.
That's great. Thank you for that background.
Mhm.
That's some really fascinating life experience there, and traveling to you said the second study you did a master's was going to the Arctic.
Yeah, that was in the Northwest Territories in a town called Tuktoyaktuk, is where I was, and they were very much they hunted for the majority of their food,
Hmm.
and my project was concerning whale population management.
Hmm. Uh, and what are some of the things that come to mind when you're referring to, what were some of the things that as you came across permaculture that struck you as forward thinking, that stood on the shoulders of, let's say, some of what you already knew?
Yeah, I think in a broad sense, it was able, it seemed to me that it was a system that was able to preserve um, the idea of human habitation, human society being able to find a harmony with nature, be embedded within natural processes, i.e., make our living from, um, you know, last year's sunshine or this year's sunshine without doing harm to next year's growth, um, rather than, you know, making our livelihood from fossil energy and doing harm to next year's growth.
Yeah.
Um, Achieving that while also maintaining um, a wonderful standard of living, and probably a much better standard of culture.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and that's, you know,
Yeah.
it's always this like there's the social, there's the economic, and then there's the ecological, and so much of sustainable development is sort of horse trading on, okay, well, we're going to lose some of our economy, we're going to gain a little bit of ecology, and that's kind of where things feel like they stand, right? It's like if we're
Right.
going to do anything good for the environment, we're going to have to make less money, and we're going to have a lower standard of living, and we're going to lose jobs, and that
Hmm.
whole all of that. And then
Right.
so
Right.
permaculture felt like it was one of these solutions that could um, make us just as well. It could provide just as good of a livelihood or better without damaging the ecosystem, and potentially bring back some kind of um, community-based regional society instead of continuing the march in the opposite direction. So, you know,
Hmm.
it just seemed
Yeah.
like the right one of those right solutions to me.
Yeah. So where did that journey take you next? Did you take, where and who'd you take certification with? What were some of your evolutions in the pursuit of studying what you came across in the big black
Yeah.
book library there?
So at that time, I was running a small market garden in Canada, and but I had already decided to come back to the States. So I was going to move back to the States, and I had gone to Vermont in undergrad, and I wanted to go back there because I had a good friend who had just bought a farm, and I figured, okay, I'm going to go back, and um, I'll help him out with the farm. And so then I just looked at, who's doing permaculture in Vermont? What's the story? Because after you read that book, it's a great book, but then you want to know what's happening in the real world. Where are these people? How come I've never heard of this? So that's how I did the search, and I ran across Ben Falk. So I went and did uh, I reached out to him and just said, "Hey, do you want a hand with things?" That's how I like to do it.
Yeah.
It just is a nice. I like the academic experience, but I also just like to call a person up who seems like they're doing something cool, and then see if I can just go and help them out, because
Yeah.
who doesn't want help,
Right.
with what
Right.
they're doing? And
Exactly.
it's the best way to learn.
Right. Totally.
And so I ended up working for him for a summer on all kinds of random stuff. It happened to be the time that he bought the larger piece of property. His family um, has like 100 and whatever, something, 40 acres now in that area. And
Is
so,
that the one in Rochester?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was in on the establishment phase of that, helping. There was a group of 14 interns, and between all of us, I think we planted 15,000 trees on that property. And then I took the PDC that summer as well. So I was kind of like taking the PDC, embedded in the work of building that place out.
Hmm.
And
That's
yeah, so
great.
that was the next step of the journey there. And then it seemed intriguing, but it was also hard to make things work financially as far as a job. So that's when at that time I started to look for jobs outside Vermont, because I couldn't find any job. I
Hmm.
couldn't find any job in Vermont that would pay the bills. It was kind of,
Yeah.
it just happens sometimes. So
Yeah.
um and that around that time is when I got I applied for a job with extension, Cornell Extension, and got that. And yeah, so that's the story of what I call the first phase, what I would call the first phase of my like getting involved in permaculture.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hmm.
Well, and you do, I mean, my experience again, sort of adjacent to you, I seem to come across these projects and they tell me, oh yeah, Erik was here and he did a bunch of cool stuff for us with his Cornell hat on. So
Hmm.
I'm talking about Costa Bootsikaris
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
the Cherrytown property uh,
Yep.
that we took the agroforestry class to, that also
Right.
posted. Um,
Yeah.
so could you tell us a little about that? Like how do you find are you able to, like, what's your job title with extension and how are you able to fold in some of what your personal interests are with what that job enables you to do with in terms
Yeah,
of
I got really lucky. I started out with something totally different, food safety, just got my foot in the door. And then in a couple of years, I got a different job, which was commercial horticulture and natural resources, which is
Mhm.
a hugely expansive range of things that I can do.
Right.
So, a
That's
lot
great.
of conventional farmers. I've probably worked with 200 farms across in the southeast, and yeah, I used to work in a region that had 17 counties, and I went to every orchard and lots of vegetable farms, and organic ones, conventional ones, indoor greenhouses with hydroponics, and natural resource issues. So I worked with people who were working with invasives, with forestry, with pond management. So it was just like, it still is a little bit of everything, lots
Hmm.
of stuff. And I've been able to, I really have, I really hold them in very high regard. Um, I've been able to, of course, I have to cover certain things. If I get a call from someone, I have to go and do what they're doing. But I can also develop programs that I think are interesting or good. So
Yeah.
within natural resources, agroforestry spans the gap between commercial horticulture and natural resources. So
Hmm.
anybody who's doing agroforestry is more than welcome to tap me for any kind of consultation or knowledge that I can provide.
Yeah.
And because so many people do it in different ways, I've had to look into details on stuff that I never otherwise would have. So I appreciate that greatly.
Oh, that's cool. Are you at liberty to talk about the Cherrytown one? What were some of the things you helped out with on that one?
The main issue there was um planting. So yeah, Costa and I are also just friends, and I've known Ivan for a while. And so the planting that they described to me, so they got several grants to do a large agroforestry planting there. And
Hmm.
I said, that's awesome. And they said, here's our planting plan. And having recently been, I think when they told me about it, that was maybe before or after I went to Brazil and learned a lot from Ernst. I can't remember, but it was around that time.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that stuff was in my mind. And I was looking at their planting plan and I was saying, this is missing a lot of things according to that way of thinking.
Hmm.
Maybe there would be a way to add in some of those relationships and elements that I was learning about. And so that's, I think, the main value that I brought there was trying to help them expand
Yeah.
the ecological functioning part of the planting.
Cool. And just as a thread for our listeners to know, there, Costa is a graduate of our class from almost 14 years ago in New York City,
Wow.
and made a number of really nice quality films for us. That kind of the capstone was in Habit, in which
Yeah.
folks will see a good bit of footage of Ben's site, not the Moortown site, not the Rochester site that
Yeah.
Erik was just talking about. And definitely want to plug the film in Habit and Costa's film site called Woodlanders as well, as a
Yeah. Amazing stuff.
really important resource. And the work he's doing is important, admirable, great friend, and also collaborator on Rondout Creek Watershed Alliance that I'm part of.
Mhm.
He's the director of now.
Right on.
So there's a lot of threads here that connect us all through the fabric of permaculture work, restorative work. I would say too, this is a great segue. I could go into a lot of different topics, but the Syntropic methodology, your work with Ernst, would you want to elaborate for our listeners on exactly what is that term? What's
Mhm.
your understanding of the origins of it, and then where your own explorations of it are and your inspirations from it?
Yeah. So the term itself, you have to trace it back, I guess, to Ernst himself. Ernst Goethe, he was born in Switzerland, actually just a couple hours away from where my dad was born. Both of them grew up very close to each other, and he he grew up on a farm, um, and it was a small mixed farm. And the key is that the farm existed before the Marshall Plan. And that meant that a lot of the traditional ways of agriculture in the region were still intact. So he told me stories about apple, pear, peach, plum interplantings with grain in between that would get grazed by sheep in the winter. Then the sheep would go up into the highland. Then the cows would come in the summer. And then everything would be pruned down and there would be grapes growing on it. And then you grow the turn. And it's so much four-dimensional agriculture happening, so diverse, mixed, integrating woody species and being able to produce all this high quality food. That's
Mhm.
one of the things that he always stresses is, of course, the actual quality of the food is so much higher because they were not using fertilizer, they were not using pesticides or chemicals of any kind. It was all done organically, but beyond organically. Um,
Yeah.
and they really didn't bring in many nutrients other than what the sheep and cows brought down from the higher altitudes.
Hmm.
And so that was the context that he grew up in. And then he became a geneticist and he became the director of the plant improvement unit for the Swiss government. And the way he says it, his job was to invent genotypes or create genotypes for plants to adapt them or to give them an advantage in conditions that humans were actively degrading. Meaning Humans are busy destroying all of their topsoil, and the plant improver's job is to try to play catch up with genetics because the soil is just so
To
destroyed.
compensate.
And
Yeah.
so he said, wouldn't it be more intelligent to create an agriculture where we can have an environment for the plant that where it can thrive? And that is his life's work, is creating environments for plants rather than creating genetic improvement for a plant to adapt it to a degraded environment.
Makes so much sense. Rather than an end of the pipe solution, like tweaking with
Yeah,
genetics, let's look holistically at a setting. Yeah.
exactly. The whole package of the Industrial Revolution, the Green Revolution, is the pesticides, the plant improvement, the fertilizers,
Right.
all of it is tweaking those last little things, ignoring, the main provider of fertility and all of that. And
Mhm.
in another sense, what syntropic agriculture has achieved is, if we think of natural succession or we think of fallowing a field, when people remove themselves from an ecosystem, fertility begins to increase the day they leave. We look at Chernobyl, and within a few years of leaving, the photosynthesis in the blast radius is 2.5 times the surrounding area where humans are still grazing. Um, and what that means is that the ecosystem is intact and it's building fertility. And
Mhm.
then the history of humans for a very long time has been to periodically go to a place where fertility is increased and take it all as fast as we possibly can. Burn it, grow crops, raise animals, and then once the fertility is collapsed, then we leave and we go find another place, and then we don't come back for some amount of time. And
Mhm.
that's the system that most people around the world have been using for probably 60,000 years or more.
Mhm.
And what he achieved was to take the process that's happening during a fallow, where nature is accumulating and building resources and increasing fertility, and grow crops at the same time while that process is happening. So, to manage that process of fertility accumulation through natural succession while having crops there and producing marketable yields. And in fact,
Mhm.
he has achieved it so well that his yield of cacao, which is his yield of cacao is 5 to 6 times higher than conventional cacao on the same soil in the neighboring farm, while the inclusion of biomass, or the production of biomass is also fivefold higher from the natural regenerating forests on the same soil.
Mhm.
So this is what syntropic agriculture has achieved, is natural succession and crop production side by side simultaneously. In the big picture, I think that's the easiest way I can say it.
Thank you. That's great. And really gives me a good sense of it. It reminds me of the sections from the Global Gardener I enjoy where Bill will say stuff like, there's nothing of an order like this in nature, where he's
Yeah,
talking about how this combination of what we'll also hear called participatory ecologies, that when we get into starting to combine the act of gardening with the act of
yeah,
ecological restoration, you really get. And it's also reminding me of the material where you'll hear anecdotally, I don't know about this actual project, but the Greening the Desert Lawton material, where he'll say how people who lived in the area scoffed at what they were doing because they planted so many species that weren't about getting
yeah.
harvest, because they were just thinking about soil improvement and nitrogen fixation and all of these other things.
Hmm.
So it makes so much sense how permaculture experience and background would lead you to exploring this particular
Yeah,
methodology around forest ecologies. Would
yeah. And I don't think, some people, permaculture friends, ask me a lot of what are the differences? Is it really something new? And what I would say is that, in a conceptual sense, permaculture has the same ideals as far as how
Sure.
to approach food production.
That's
I
my
think
sense from what you're saying.
sorry,
Yeah, that's my sense from what you're saying. Yeah.
for sure. There's no there's no like philosophical meaning. There's no meaningful philosophical difference. What I would say is that the syntropic agroforestry is not as broad of a design science. It's not a full design science for all of human habitation. It is a system for growing food or improving soil. It's the
Mhm.
that system. It's systematized so that it's a functional, uh, more functional than most other riffs on the forest garden that I've seen for production.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
it seems to be more productive. It seems to be heavier on the management. Um, and partly this is because it was made by a farmer who was really trying to make it have the efficiency of farming. And yeah, and I should also mention just really quickly, the word syntropy is indeed the contrapositive or the counterpoint of entropy. So everybody knows entropy is the tendency of all things in the universe to disperse and go to a lower state of organization, lose usable energy to do work, whereas syntropy is the opposite of that. So syntropy is when a life process takes degraded carbon dioxide and water and light and creates a more potent, well, a molecule that is higher in complexity and is able to do more work. So the
Mhm.
whole process of natural succession is a syntropic process whereby resources are created, more energy is conserved and bound together in usable form, and an
Mhm.
a forest fire would be a hugely entropic event, or tillage would be an entropic event where energy is degraded and dispersed. So that's where the word comes from.
That reminds me of the Dorian Sagan in a book called Into the Cool
Hmm.
talked about how living systems on Earth at a sort of meta-organism level have this
Yeah,
counterspin, like you're saying, the second law, and he calls it
yeah,
negentropy. Is
yeah.
I
Schrodinger
like,
said the same. Yeah,
but I like syntropy. It's a much more, it's got a better feel to it phonetically. The negentropy
yeah.
is a
That
negative.
was originally made by a mathematician who came far after Schrodinger, an Italian.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah, yeah. That's important, and I also really appreciate how you framed it because the what I've been, I feel that many people misconstrue permaculture as being largely about, say, a methodology of forest gardening, for instance. Forest gardening is the classic one that you get often, right?
right.
Like, oh yeah, we're doing permaculture. We got a forest garden over here. And you're like, yeah, I guess you don't really understand the design
Yeah,
dimension of what permaculture is.
yeah,
But I encounter that all the time. And it's so funny. And I think it's so um, again, just reflective of how much we have in common as far as like what's important to emphasize about what the value is of permaculture design is that it's about design, and that's an
yeah,
important distinction from many of the other things that we'll encounter as gardeners, as growers, which are really primarily about gardening and really like honing our craft around that because that is one of the foundational legs of a permaculture system, right? But
hmm
permaculture is also about entire human settlements and waste systems and water systems,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I often, I think it's important to say that so that it gets clear, like, well, the reason why we need to have both and it's hand in glove. We need to have permaculture design and we need to have the wisdom of syntropic, biodynamic,
yeah,
traditional ecological knowledge, all these other herbalists, holistic, Ayurvedic, will bring, Chinese geomancy. They're all part of it,
yeah, yeah,
but it's not necessarily that any one of those is bringing the umbrella that kind of brings it all together, which is the design aspect
yeah.
of it.
One other thing I wanted to mention, and one of the reasons why I was still very much searching for something else was as a production or a commercial farmer.
Yeah.
I had a problem, and it was that the permaculture solutions that I had read about, that I had learned about, were somehow not allowing me to get where I wanted to be as far as being a commercial farm that met these criteria
Hmm.
of building more. So to put it into other words, as an organic farmer, I tried to use mulch, but it was too expensive. And then mulch has all these toxins. So then we ended up using plastic mulch for a while, and I hated that. And so we got rid of the plastic mulch. And then without the plastic mulch, I needed to cultivate the soil. And so we just had bare ground, tilling all the time, cultivating all the time. And at a certain point, I said to myself, look, there's nothing permaculture about any of this. There's nothing even regenerative about this. I'm just doing tillage all the time. And
Hmm.
basically, the more the better. The more I can get to a miniature version of monoculture agriculture, the better it is economically for me. And so I
Right.
kept getting pushed in that direction. And I said, at a certain point, I just said, if this is what farming has to be, then bummer. I'm going to let someone else do this and go do something else with my life.
Hmm.
And around that time is when I really started thinking, how could I grow all of my own mulch and this is like, you know, 10 acre, 15 acre scale. You just can't bring in mulch for that. It's just not something that is feasible. And so I started thinking more and more of how can I grow my own mulch, um, not over here and then bring it over here, but how can I grow my own mulch here and my own crops here and fold the mulch over on the sides and grow mulch here and fold that in and have my crops in the middle. And so
Hmm.
I was thinking of and playing with these designs, and that's what finally led me to finding out about this Swiss Brazilian guy who had systematized all of this and figured it all out and a whole heck of a lot more.
So tell us about some of what you saw down there and you learned as far as what you could synopsize for us in terms of those really key aspects of his methods and techniques and your takeaways from that that you'd want to share and the ones that really were like, oh, I can see how this is going to be useful now with my practice.
Yeah, man, it is a tough thing to do. It's sort of like trying to if you finished your first PDC and someone says, "Can you summarize that for me?" It's a hard
I figured that. I
it's a
figured that.
tough one. No, but
Take your time.
there are a few really essential features of the systems that he has designed and that people have designed using these ideas that do span the globe, no matter where they're implemented. So, a lot
Mhm.
of people think, oh, it's a tropical thing. It's not a tropical thing. He's just been doing a lot of work in the tropics. But so some of the most important parts of the design or some of the most essential features of the practice. Um, First, I'll start in no particular order. Um, when it comes to developing that idea of working with the power of natural succession and growing your crops, we have to look at what natural succession is doing. Why does a natural succession process build fertility, and how could we potentially optimize that process so that it can happen as fast as possible? So then this brings us to one of the main ideas of planting when we plant using all the species from the different points of natural succession and putting them there at the same time when we plant. And there are exceptions to this, but what that does is if you think of succession as a roadmap, you're heading towards a destination, which we call the climax community, which gets a reset, babe, um, which gets a reset and then starts back. But there are a lot of dead ends. And those dead ends to natural succession occur if and when there are species that should be there to fulfill a certain function, but they are not yet there. And so at that time, natural succession will stall, sometimes for decades. Not much will happen. Changes to the community will be slow or almost imperceptible. And then something will come and reset the system. So a classic example we see a lot in the temperate climate is the forest closes in, all the trees start to look senescent. There's not a whole lot of annual growth being put on. The net primary productivity drops, and then the whole place gets choked up with vines. When you see all of those vines choking up the whole place, that's the message that a strong wind at some point needs to come down and blow all of these trees down together and get it all to the ground so that the new seed bank that's there, which the birds will bring in new seed, can pop up and restart the system from day one. And of course, on day one, we've got our annuals and our short-lived perennials, and then our secondary trees, our longer-lived secondary trees, all the way up to our climax community. And so the planting of a syntropic system should include plants with all those life cycles and all of those heights, those different heights. So that's the other. So that's the life cycle, where we try to create a full stack of all the life cycle steps along all the pathway of succession, without which succession can stall and create problems. And then stratification, which is in each of those life cycle steps. So the first being the annuals, and then the short-lived perennials, and then the secondary forest. Each one of those has a stratification of plants that are growing in the full sun, plants that are growing in, oh, this guy came to join.
Nice.
Plants that are growing in full sun, plants that are growing in dappled shade, a lot of shade, and plants that are growing at the very bottom of the forest floor. And it so happens that across the world, there is more or less an ideal ratio of those strata in relationship to one another that is just the most effective form for harvesting light to maximize photosynthesis. And it is more or less to have a lot of plants at the low level, slightly lower density of plants at the high level, and then quite a bit lower at the top. So it's 20 at the top. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna have to pause for 1 second.
You got it.
Can we pause the recording?
Yeah. Take your time, please. No problem.
Yeah. Yeah, so stratification with 20% density at the top, then 40, then 60, then 80. And so that structure essentially allows for the most photosynthesis to take place. And that's another key feature of these systems developing. So the life cycle and the stratifications. Those are some of like the major elements. And then another one that really, and we learn about the layers in permaculture. It's a very similar thing, but there's an additional aspect that I learned in Syntropy, which is the dynamism and the pruning. I think that's in practice, that's what sets it apart from most of the other systems that I've learned of and seen practiced, is that many of the support species for a crop, so it maybe a system is designed for peaches. You'll have peaches in their layer, which is medium, and then you'll have some trees above them, and then you'll have some very tall trees above them. And one would think, wait, peaches need a lot of light, that's going to give them shade. But at the end of the dormant season, all of the trees above the peach tree will all be pollarded. So then there'll be full light on the peach tree. All of that material from the trees at the top and above the peaches is all put on the ground and mulched in an organized way to feed the peaches. And the regrowth from all of those trees sends huge amounts of information through the soil to grow that not only goes to those trees which were cut, but also goes to the peaches.
Mm-hmm.
And so that choreographing of the dance of hormones to benefit the crop and also the soil food web as a whole, is probably where I've learned the most in the syntropy
What
world.
what would be some of those species that you would pollard that were around, say, the peach in that example?
So for that example, peach is medium high strata, meaning um, emergent. So just to name them, the emergent strata means it's trees or plants that need to grow in full sun. They'll die without full sun.
Hmm.
So a juniper would be emergent strata, um, of a secondary part of the cycle. A radish would be an emergent strata of the first part of the cycle because it can't grow in shade.
Hmm.
Um, and a poplar would be an emergent of secondary into yeah, early secondary to late secondary life cycle.
Hmm.
So for that period, the poplar may be the emergent that's over the peach. It also has to meet the criteria of being super easy to manage and having a lot of other ecological benefits. So when poplar wood is pruned, it goes on the ground, it breaks down super fast. Poplar and all the salix are also they bridge mycorrhizal communities from ecto to arbuscular, which is a really important player at that time in the development of the soil.
Hmm.
And so that would be one that could be the mother tree or the pollarding tree for each peach for quite a long time. But at the same time, you would have the next stage of mother pollard tree coming up underneath the poplar. So it could be that there's your peach is here, and then your poplar is up here, and then
Yeah.
there's an oak seedling growing up that's going to take the place of the poplar when the poplar fades out. And then
Hmm.
underneath the peach, there may be a persimmon growing up because the peach is only going to live 20 years old and the
Yeah.
persimmon could live 50.
Right.
Um, so as you can see,
Nice.
it
Yeah.
gets four-dimensional pretty quickly,
Yeah.
but it's really geared towards well, many people are using it for production agriculture. It's not that it's limited to production agriculture, but I think that's what amazed me about that is that the permaculture food forest concept is very similar in a lot of ways, but it's hard to go and find a practicing successful commercial permaculture food forest. There's a
Yes.
few that are doing it a little bit here and there,
Yeah.
but it I felt like it wasn't delivering on the it's going to be lower work, you're going to have better yields, and you're going to have higher quality.
Well,
Um,
I totally agree with you on that, and that's
yeah,
been my experience as well. And my older school version, what I gravitated towards to study was the biodynamic orchard keeping because
yeah,
I saw that as being akin to perhaps what it sounds like you're describing your experience of permaculture, forest gardening, the lack of real production
yeah,
yields. What's the maintenance plan? Uh,
yeah.
and sort of lending themselves more to the hobbyist backyard gardener, not really to like some
Exactly.
market
Which is
scale,
wonderful.
which
Which
is
is
great.
wonderful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's great. But then when you ask questions like, well, what does this look like as a production model?
Yeah.
To me, the closest thing I was coming across at that time was biodynamics. And this sounds
Yep.
like it's even further along in the direction that we're wanting to see of like and it makes so much sense to me because like
Yeah.
this again to just on this biodynamic analogy because I always felt that the lack in the forest garden model production was the minimize not enough pruning, not enough
Yep.
actual management, like you're saying. That's such an important piece of what you're describing here in that.
Yeah, and one of the things that a lot of people, one of the sort of responses of the movement was to say, okay, well, the forest garden is just planted too densely and our temperate trees need a lot of more sun, so we just need to increase the planting spacing and get more light to these trees if we want to really produce.
Right.
And the syntropic model does something much more incredible for me. The planting density is actually 100 times higher than any food forest you've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Anywhere he wants to have a cacao tree, he plants 100 seeds. And around those seeds are species of dozens of other strata and life cycle and trees growing every which way, but they're all managed because it's planted in a very it's planted in an easy to manage way, and they are thinned out on a specific timeline. So when I
Mm-hmm.
said that you take the idea of natural succession in a fallow and put it over your crops, all of these species, they're the overstocking that nature does, for example,
Right.
nature will plant 10,000 trees where there's going to be five, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
so to do that in an agricultural setting, it takes some figuring out how, the logistics, but that's what he was able to do. And those prunings and the thinning of those trees is not only the biomass that's on the ground that feeds the soil, it's
Yeah.
also all of the root exudates when the plants regrow
Right.
and the soil building that happens in situ. That's why it's so different than just getting a ton of wood chip mulch and mulching all of your trees.
Yep.
You know, it's
That
not
makes
against some of those inputs in the beginning. I still use wood chips
sure.
implanting to start the plantings,
Yeah.
but the idea is that after a short period of time, if you've planted it densely enough and planted it stratified and have all the parts of succession, is that you always have the pruning trees there to keep succession moving along and to keep being able to prune to feed the crop tree that's developing
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or the grain or the animal system or whatever it is. It's not the most famous systems of his are for cacao because that's what he's been doing most of, but the systems have been adapted to a great variety of crops and farming types.
And again, I know I don't want to keep you too long. I want to respect your time here, let you get to your family. And I want to ask a wrap up kind of question on this around your application of it in your at Black Creek Nursery.
Yeah.
I know you shared with the class hazelnut. Is that the main
Yeah.
one that you're exploring some of these methodologies with? But yeah, go share with us what you're experimenting
Yeah.
with now that you're back home from the Brazil experience.
So I had been starting a couple of these several years before I got to meet Ernst. I had another teacher, Scott Hall, who's a really good old student of Ernst, and another one, Roger Geetson, with whom I did this workshop most recently.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been having a lot of different experiments going, and
Cool.
the ones that I have now are one that's geared for hazelnut, one that is geared for table grapes, um, one for persimmons and peaches, planting another one for apples next spring, and then the vegetable fields are turning into something that will be mainly production, perennial production. Sorry, they will be vegetable production perennially. So I'll be producing annuals
Mm-hmm.
perennially. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Cool.
it's a system so that I can produce vegetables indefinitely using perennial species to support the annual production bed.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, being able to grow all my mulch right next to the planting bed and have efficient ways of harvesting that mulch or shredding it and delivering it to where the annual plants need to feed,
Mm-hmm.
which essentially is a lot of grasses that don't move and a lot of trees and figuring out a sensible design to get all that mulch where it needs to be at the right time.
Right.
So many and so it spans different scales. So the grape system that I'm doing, I can't imagine doing it that intensively at the 5 acre scale. If I
Mm-hmm.
was going to scale it up, I'd have to simplify a little bit. The vegetable system that I'm doing though could be scaled up to virtually any size. And
Mm-hmm.
so if that is successful, then we'll have a model that really, hey, you could do this, you could grow this out to a large vegetable farm.
And have you come across some of Rodale's research into that no-till methods that they're
Yes,
using with some of those cover crops, right?
for sure. That was in fact in my experience of trying to find how can I grow my own mulch. That was the first thing that I came across is the rolling crimping method.
Yeah, right.
And
I haven't done it. I've just read about it.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal system. It didn't work for me that well. That doesn't mean it's not good. It only means that what you have is a ratio of one area of cover crop to one area of production space.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're just taking that area and rolling it down.
Right.
And in many cases, from conventional to organic to large scale to small scale, that doesn't provide enough biomass to get you there in terms of like the weed pressure and all of that. And then
Right.
also, those are usually, of course, it's good. I'm very, I'm a proponent of that, but it's also done with annual cover crops that require their own tillage to establish at some point,
Mhm.
usually.
Okay, good point. Yeah.
Um,
So in
so
contrast, what you're working on will be the crops that will be your mulch crops will be on the sides, on the periphery, it sounds like, and you'll fold them
yeah,
down.
we'll have double rows of willows that get pollarded, and
Mm-hmm.
then after the willow there will be a swath of bunch grasses with some nitrogen fixers that are really high biomass producing perennial bunch grasses, and then in the middle there will be a vegetable bed that has tons of mulch, and then a mirror image on the other side, and then potential for one fruit tree row in the middle somewhere between the willows.
It's,
So there's like, but you'll have a way to mechanize pollarding willows really quickly, shredding it so that it lands right on the production bed, and then cutting these perennial bunch grasses and putting that on top. And our first year this year of doing that same idea with annuals of where we cut this much biomass and put it in a bed in the center,
mm-hmm.
it really had some good success. I can say that for at least three different crop types, we had the lowest disease and pest pressure that I've ever had, best production, no fertilizers, no sprays, and of course, it was lower production for the field, but I think we're going to be able to overcome that with the higher productivity of these perennial bunching grasses. So to
Mm-hmm.
me, I'm like back as excited as I have ever been about these systems. I thought that it was just going to have to be tillage, organic agriculture, or or give up. And
Yeah.
now I'm recharged with some ideas that are truly exciting to me, that we could reach a no-till, high productive agriculture. I think for a while I felt like that was off the table, and now it's back on the table for me.
Well, Eric, so inspiring, really. I so appreciate the work you're doing, and really I'm looking forward to bringing some more students to sit at your feet and get the benefit of the experiments that you're running there. I mean, this is really such important work that you're doing as far as the actual working models and working out these details at a scale where then you can say, all right, this is something that now we can start to really take this show on the road and scale this up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just really commend your work. I think it's the kind of thing that honestly universities and grants and endowments should be getting behind this kind of R&D, not like more nanotech or more,
Yeah. Drones.
not drones and AI nonsense that we're seeing money thrown at, rather
Yeah.
than like real working food systems from the depth of experience and background that you're bringing to it. And yeah,
It's
really.
okay. I'll be perfectly happy if I can take a little bit longer and get there without all that, without their money. I'll be happier anyway in the long run. So,
Oh yeah. Well, and I think it shows the proof of the real validity of the work that that's not
yeah.
a necessary part of how you're, as they say, manifesting it. You're bringing that about in an authentic way that's from your own integrity and your own interest. And
Yeah.
absolutely, I'm simply saying from a
Oh,
conceptual
yeah, yeah.
point, right? It's interesting the values that are out there, and to me, hearing what you just described, the importance of that work is huge.
I
And
guess I'll just leave one thought on that is that everybody has seen someplace a plant just absolutely thriving that wasn't babied, wasn't sprayed, wasn't fertilized, and it's just in peak perfect health. And there is nothing that is as exciting for me surrounding all of this stuff as feeling like we have been given a roadmap as to how to create that kind of health for the plants. And having seen it this year, um, that the hazelnuts were growing best under the oak tree. I mean, they grew twice as much when they had the mother tree over them. And that these vegetables, with no fertilizer, but being fed by a living soil, grew so much better, no fertilizer, no sprays, where we always would have to spray. We would have to spray for many things. I mean, organic sprays, but we had to do it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so just starting to see the little results that I have here and
Yeah,
having been to Ernst's farm and see the results that he has after 40 years, it takes all the doubt away. And
that's great.
it's priceless. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, thank you for your time, and I look forward to bringing the class to you in October. And so appreciate your help with this education and evolution of our cultural consciousness of ways of living that are more adapted, more suited, more enjoyable participation with the planet.
Yeah.
And really appreciate you and the work you're doing.
Same to you. Thank you for bringing this all together and all the work that you do.
Thank you, Erik.
All right. Have a good
Have a
night.
good evening. Best to you and your family.
You too.
Take care.